If I read this as a film script, I would say I was in an Eastern Bloc country in the 1950s behind the Iron Curtain.
You've got tremendous power invested in an organisation which, because of its powers, can effectively act like a judge, jury and executioner all rolled up into one.
We've lost our investments, we've lost our home. I've personally lost my business reputation. The only thing I haven't lost is my family. Everybody could have this happen to them with the tax office.
Honestly, dealing with the ATO, I've never come across such a mongrel bunch of bastards in my entire life.
Welcome to Four Corners. I'm Michael Brissenden. No one would dispute that the Australian Taxation Office has an important job to do, raising the $360 billion needed every year to keep the country running. To do that, it's been given extraordinary powers. But powers unchecked can lead to mistakes and abuse, particularly if there's pressure to raise ever more revenue. A joint Four Corners Fairfax investigation has found that the tax office can appear to act as a law unto itself, and sometimes it gets its findings disturbingly wrong. Tonight, we meet people who say their lives have been destroyed by the heavy-handed tactics of the ATO. Among them is a whistleblower who describes a toxic culture driven by revenue targets and KPIs that staff liken to a cash grab. Last week, in the lead-up to our program, his home was raided by the ATO and the Federal Police. Adele Ferguson reports.
On the northern edge of the Adelaide Hills, a family-run business is doing its best to stay afloat. The problem isn't the remote location. The Australian Taxation Office has its sights on the company and may well determine if it survives or not.
Adele, hi. Did you find the place okay?
Oh dear. Come in.
So welcome to the nerve centre of Outscribe.
Any developments with the tax office?
No, nothing final. We're still in the thick of it. We're still waiting for an outcome, so everyone is still in limbo. So we need to have an answer. We need to be able to go forward because we can't sustain this.
How would you describe the tax office?
In one short word, I would call what they're doing evil. What they're doing is evil. There's an agenda that's going on in there, and the Australian public know nothing about it. We knew nothing about it. We were naive. How can you describe someone who's trying to destroy your livelihood and destroy your way of life? I'd call that evil.
Annette Pike has built a successful transcription business which gives her the freedom and flexibility to work from home. With a swag of government, corporate and academic clients, she can't do it all herself, so she outsources jobs to 16 transcription typists around the country.
I just let people know, let the contractors know what work is available. If they want to pick up some work, they put their hand up. So they get to dictate their own hours, they get to dictate when they work. The only thing they have to do is get that work back on time.
Business at Outscribe was booming until the tax office came knocking in May 2017.
They were trying to ascertain whether our business model of utilising self-employed contractors or independent contractors was legitimate. It would seem that they were trying to say that we should be employing them, that they should be our employees. That's not the way the industry works. That's not the way our business model works.
4 months into the investigation, the ATO made a shock move.
That was a day that is seared into my memory. It's the 9th of the 11th, and that was our terrorist attack from the ATO. The ABNs of the contractors had been cancelled, summarily cancelled. They were no longer able to work.
My world literally fell apart. I had the rug pulled out from under me by the ATO. I was Gobsmacked is probably the only way I can describe it.
Catherine Little is one of the contractors whose Australian business number was cancelled.
They were literally taking away my capacity to pay my bills, pay my car loan, feed myself, live my life with no concern whatsoever of the repercussions. It was just like, it was just nothing to them. And I just thought, these are real people you're dealing with, you know? I was so upset. Sorry. I was so upset that I didn't ask the right questions. Sorry.
Catherine was once an environmental scientist, but chronic depression forced her to rethink her life. She travelled the country in a caravan, funding it all by working for Outscribe and 2 other transcription companies. She made around $700 a week. Now that was in jeopardy.
No one could give me a reason why the ABN had been cancelled. No one could tell me what part of the legislation or what part of the guidelines or what part of the regulations I did not comply with. I actively asked them, you know, what do I need to do to comply with the regulations behind the decision that you're making?
She was running out of cash and feared she'd have to go on Centrelink benefits.
The government talks about dole bludgers and people who don't want to work. Well, I'm sorry, but that's rubbish. Here's someone who wants to work. Hello, over here, want to work, let me do it. I don't want to be on the dole. I don't want to have to do these. I don't need to be on the dole. I have the skills, I have the capacity, I have the equipment. I can do it. Just let me do it. I don't need to be a drain on the taxpayer. Let me be a taxpayer, because that's my role. I have the ability. But no, apparently, who knows?
Ken Phillips. Now, first steps. I've seen this before. We've seen ABNs cancelled on people that are quite clearly running their own small business. What did surprise me about this is the attack of the tax office, not on reasonably well-off people, but on people who are really, truly vulnerable, and that got me very angry. The major thing is that we've got to get the information together.
Ken Phillips, an advocate for small business, took on Outscribe's case.
Well, the first thing we did was get some lawyers involved, some people who know and understand the Taxation Office, and we started bringing in the legal side of things. And ultimately, we're able to negotiate, I've got to say very hard negotiations, we're able to negotiate to get the ABNs reinstated, but it took 13 weeks. So this was 13 weeks where these vulnerable, low-paid, mostly women, were without incomes. And I've got to tell you, they were in crisis.
11 months on, the ATO is still investigating Outscribe. Catherine and the other contractors don't know if they'll be able to keep their ABNs. And Annette Pike fears her business may not survive.
If I read this as a film script, I would say I was in an Eastern Bloc country in the 1950s behind the Iron Curtain, because it's the government controlling the way people live in a way that's malicious. There's no other word for it. It's malicious and it's vengeful. And we're supporting the Australian economy. How do you make sense of that?
The Australian Taxation Office is one of the most powerful institutions in Australia. If the ATO suspects you owe it money, you're guilty until proven innocent. It can raid your home or business without a warrant and compel you to answer questions.
You've got tremendous power invested in an organisation which, because of its powers, can effectively act like a judge, jury and executioner all rolled up into one. That's the problem.
They can order money to be taken away from you simply on an allegation of debt, and this is unlike any other organisation, any other institution in Australia. They play games with you, and they just pull you in, and then they cook you slowly, effectively until you are roasted and you are dead.
People are brought up to believe that they have the presumption of innocence, that they have the right to remain silent if they're questioned by the authorities, that the authorities are obliged to read them their rights if they get into trouble, and that their assets can't be confiscated by the authorities. Now, in the world of tax, none of those things is true. You might say that murderers have more rights than taxpayers.
There's a growing unease in the small business community that the ATO is abusing its powers.
Now, honestly, dealing with the ATO, I've never come across such a mongrel bunch of bastards in my entire life. This is the inflow that's coming in. This is the raw effluent.
Mark Freeman is in the waste treatment business.
This is coming in from the houses, from the hospitals, the schools. People just look at it and see it as a waste product. So I look at it as a resource.
At the Ulladulla sewage treatment plant on the New South Wales south coast, Mark Freeman is trialling a system to turn waste into reusable water.
So once your designated amount of water has actually hit the activation point, the system then takes over everything for you. So there's really nothing more for the person to do except to receive their clean water back, where they can reuse it back, as I say, back to the toilet, back to the laundry.
Mark Freeman's troubles began in mid-2011 when the tax office began auditing his company and told him he wasn't entitled to the research and development rebates he'd been claiming. He was hit with a hefty tax bill. September 2013, the ATO says you owe them $250,000. What was your reaction when you got that letter?
Oh, shock, stunned, lack of comprehension as to how they could accumulate such a large debt. The hardest thing is proving your innocence when they doom you as being guilty. And even then, having your innocence rejected without reason.
Things got worse as the tax office applied more pressure. March 2014, the ATO calls you to say it intends to bankrupt your company to get the debt. How did you react to that call?
Dismay. They actually threatened to destroy the company. If I didn't pay the money then, that they would actually destroy this company.
Two months later, the ATO issued an order known as a garnishee notice. It gave the ATO power to seize control of his bank account and take money from it.
Obviously, it's quite a financial blow to the company and a massive blow to the company's credibility as such. The bank couldn't enforce or couldn't comply with the garnishee order because the funds just wasn't there.
Mark Freeman had to work out of his shed as he battled to clear his name.
They couldn't ignore the obvious in front of them. The information that was provided to the ATO was overwhelming, that there was genuine research and development.
After 4 years of fighting, the ATO conceded its mistakes and completely wiped his debt.
The Commissioner of Taxation has advised that errors identified during the audit process have been dealt with following your objection application. The Commissioner apologises for any inconvenience or stress these errors have caused.
On a personal level, what impact has it had on you?
Oh, it's stress. What else can you say? You know, it's like I've got two jobs. One dealing with research and development, and the second one dealing with the ATO.
It's now been 7 years since the tax office came knocking, and Mark is still fighting for adequate compensation.
We put in a very small estimate of about $750,000, and we were offered $1,500. The second round, they raised it to $11,500. It's an insult to the detriment that the company has had to go through. I'm angry at them, I really am. You know, there are times when you just feel like grabbing them and trying to shake some sense into them.
People can use the word aggressive, and yes, we want an aggressive taxation office because they have to do their job of pulling in the money. No question of that at all. But what we do want is a taxation office that operates ethically, morally, and within the law. And our observation is that those principles are falling apart in relation to small business people. So the internet's become an important tool for you.
Quite important because...
Right.
Ken Phillips believes the tax office deliberately targets small business.
We know our people...
They set targets, they chase low-hanging fruit, people who are being honest and upright, and they whack them with a huge bill and then chase them. The big end of town and high wealth individuals can afford to get a whole lot of lawyers out and line the lawyers up at $800 an hour and defend themselves properly against the tax office. Small business person doesn't have that.
What are some of the complaints you get from small business about the ATO?
Look, a lot of the issues surrounding the ATO is that they're complex, they're difficult to deal with. They don't know who to talk to. But some of the real concerns are when there's a problem with an assessment at the ATO. What the ATO says, what it says you owe them, isn't what you believe you owe them. Trying to get those things sorted out is still very, very difficult.
Deborah Jenkins is the ATO's Deputy Commissioner for Small Business. There is a perception out there from people we've spoken to that small business is an easy target because most don't have the money to fight back.
Yeah, I certainly don't want small businesses to feel like they are an easy target. And if they've heard me out there defending them, we are hugely passionate. Small businesses are backbone of the Australian economy. So for me, if there was any sense that they were an easy target, that's absolutely, they should not be an easy target. And certainly, the work that we do is on education, prevention and support. I want to be helping small businesses. In fact, our mission in small business is to help viable small businesses thrive, and we absolutely believe in that.
The ATO is actively chasing more than $20 billion in outstanding taxes. It says small businesses owe 2/3 of that amount.
So it's around $13 or $14 billion. And obviously we don't want to be in a position where small businesses are owing us debt. So that's where a lot of the work that we're doing is to actually do at the front end, to actually work out why are businesses getting into debt in the first place.
At the end of the day, what we're talking about here is raising revenue. All governments of all persuasions are desperate for revenue. Business is an obvious target. Small business is the best target because they haven't got people there out there to protect them the way big business has. They don't have the barrage of lawyers. They can't afford them.
The tax office generally produces an estimate of how much revenue it's going to collect in the financial year. We refer to it as the plan. We call it the plan at leadership meetings when we discuss it and when staff discuss it amongst themselves.
Ron Shamir worked in the ATO's Serious Evasion branch in Melbourne, where he says the pressure to meet revenue forecasts put the focus on small business.
If halfway through the financial year it appeared that we were short of that target, that was supposed to be just an estimate, then a lot of pressure would be put on for cases to be done more quickly. Procedures would be changed, even staffing changes would occur in order for senior management to deal with, to address the shortfall compared to the plan. You would be looking at taxpayers who are less able to resist the might of the taxpayers that are more vulnerable. And that often meant individuals or small businesses rather than larger businesses.
Ron Shamir turned whistleblower in 2015, accusing the ATO of breaching taxpayer rights. He was eventually sacked over non-performance.
Unfortunately, the culture that I saw at the ATO is what you would expect in a powerful, large agency that has very little effective scrutiny. There's not much of somebody looking in from the outside into what's happening.
The ATO's Adelaide office plays a key role in collecting debt. An insider who's worked there for more than a decade provides an insight into the world of debt recovery.
So this document, Adele, shows that these are basically our performance data, and it shows exactly how much money is coming in from all of the work that we do. So we can measure quite effectively how much debt we're collecting and why.
So they're really analysing your time?
Absolutely, to death. It tells us the average handling times, how long each phone call takes, what break code you're in at the time. So it's pretty incredible. And then if we turn over...
Staff are monitored on their performance and how much debt they recover.
So it shows here that through negotiation I collected $300,000, through payment arrangements I collected $130,000, and through garnishees I collected $3,000.
So what does this data tell you?
Well, that data shows me that blindly issuing standard garnishees and potentially damaging certain segments of the community is not a very effective way to collect the debt.
He describes a culture where staff were encouraged to notch up garnishee notices, allowing them to seize money from taxpayers' bank accounts. In May, an email was sent to staff towards the end of the working day, encouraging them to issue more garnishee notices before their shift ended.
The last hour of power is upon us. That means you still have time to issue another 5 garnishees, right?
I was horrified.
As the end of the financial year approached, Richard Boyle says his team was told to use standard garnishee notices almost all the time. A standard garnishee notice gives the ATO ongoing access to funds in the taxpayer's bank account.
And we were essentially ordered and directed to start doing standard garnishees on every case, and I was absolutely shocked. I started taking copious minutes because I was really concerned that taxpayers were going to be adversely affected by what I could only say is an unethical decision of the Australian Taxation Office.
Richard Boyle says he made it clear he opposed this directive. What was so abhorrent about issuing standard garnishees? Why was it unethical?
That meant, and I stated, that we may be shutting down the wrong businesses and causing great distress to the community, and possibly even pushing people towards suicide that needed our compassion, as opposed to the people that we should rightly be targeting with standard garnishees.
The following week, there was an email on how to escalate debt recovery from taxpayers who owed money.
These clients are not entitled to any additional time and shouldn't be granted any unless they have unbelievably exceptional circumstances.
And what do you think was the motivation?
The motivation appeared to be that we were just collecting revenue before the end of the financial year, and it didn't matter if we hurt members of the community.
A cash grab?
That's probably a good summation. That's what my colleagues were saying on the floor.
Sorry, what were they saying?
That this was a cash grab. My colleagues were saying this is a cash grab, clearly a cash grab.
Then in late August, everything changed. Adelaide staff were told they'd been issuing more standard garnishee notices than anywhere else, and a significant amount of these were inappropriate.
In my particular meeting, a couple of us spoke out quite clearly that this was astounding, that they could, on the one hand, give a clear directive to make decisions that I thought were unethical, and then 2 months later to make up what was almost a concocted story about how they'd made an apparent mistake, that it was not a mistake.
And just in terms of... Deborah Jenkins wouldn't comment on Richard Boyle, but says garnishee notices are only used as a last resort. How many garnishees would you issue a year?
So it's around 24,000, 14,000 of which relate to small businesses, and that's around 0.5% of our total collectible debt.
If there was a directive to issue garnishees, would that alarm you?
Look, I don't know the details about, you know, who it was sent to or anything like that, but what I do know is we use those powers very sparingly.
Richard Boyle has had repeated run-ins with management over his handling of cases. In 2016, he was sanctioned for inappropriately accessing files of clients he says he was trying to help.
Because the tax office was failing these taxpayers, they were not processing their debt correspondence. As many of my colleagues, experienced colleagues in debt know, we are failing to action correspondence in a timely manner, and we are making incorrect decisions, and we are not following through and making sure that people's debt is correct. It's highly unethical for me to be garnishing a person and taking money out of their bank account if their debt is incorrect.
Richard Boyle was suspended with pay last September.
I was suspended for allegedly remitting interest incorrectly on 2 cases and for storing information on my hard drive on my computer, which is tax office property.
So what sort of information?
All of my notes to do my day-to-day job. And they told me, you're not allowed to keep information on your hard drive. Where else am I going to keep it?
In February, the ATO offered him a confidential payout to leave his job. He says he knocked it back because he wanted to expose debt collection tactics.
They offered me quite a substantial sum of money. I thought it was more important that I tell the story of what's happening in the community with these taxpayers who've been adversely affected by this unethical directive. So this...
When the tax office discovered he was talking to Four Corners, there was swift retribution.
Yep, I received this after I was paid, and it says here that I won't be paid any longer. I'm now suspended without pay. It says here that you've provided comments or statements to the media without authorisation. It's because you've got in contact with me about this story.
And so they're punishing you by stopping your pay?
It would seem so, yep.
Last week, the ATO and the Australian Federal Police caught Richard Boyle by surprise with an early morning raid on his home.
They're here to do a raid to check for taxpayer information. Seems very vindictive that they would do this, use public resources, massive amounts of public resources, to investigate someone who's blown the whistle against unethical behaviour in the Australian Taxation Office. And the tax office has withdrawn money from taxpayers' accounts en masse in the month of June 2017.
They seized his mobile phone and went through his computer, taking a raft of documents which the ATO believes contain confidential information. The Commissioner for Taxation said there is now an ongoing investigation.
They've got a charter to provide income to run the country, and I respect that. But at the end of the day, There's a tax system and it needs to be administered properly. And from my experience, they're not administering it properly in this area.
Do you think they play fair?
Not always. In my case, it's been very grubby.
Adelaide-based IT consultant Peter Fortunato has been embroiled in a fight with the tax office that he says has almost ruined him.
They relied upon fear and intimidation, so they intimidated me at every opportunity, and they threatened me that if I didn't do this, there would be this consequence. If I didn't oblige them with this, then this would happen. And that's their stock and trade. It's fear and intimidation, financial torture and emotional torture as well.
His troubles with the tax office go back to 2008, when his family trust was audited over GST claims on property investments.
There was an audit. They looked at the matter and it was quickly resolved, and a clean bill of health. And I got a follow-up letter saying everything's fine and that we'll process your return.
Astonishingly, 7 years later, the tax office revisited the case and changed its mind, accusing him of fraud and tax evasion. Peter decided to fight back.
I've had to sell assets just to stay afloat, and I've just had to basically weather the storm.
He applied for his 2008 case file through Freedom of Information and discovered it had been changed.
I found this entry of an alleged conversation, and at the end of the text, there are 2 sentences that I believe have been added.
Peter believes the record had been changed to indicate he knew he was claiming the rebates he wasn't entitled to. So you're saying that they go back into your old file notes and tamper with them?
That's what I'm saying. They went back to this Word document, added 2 sentences so they could readily form an opinion of fraud evasion. And that's just so wrong.
Peter complained to the tax watchdog that his file notes had been manipulated. The ATO conceded the case notes weren't in their original format, but denied the content had been changed. Following his complaint, the ATO dropped the fraud and evasion charge and wiped Peter's debt. Peter is still at war with the tax office over a separate audit of his company.
It's been a journey of being depressed, being desperate, not being able to speak to people about it, not knowing who to go to, and not knowing what's going to happen, and whether I really have a future doing what I'm doing in my business, or whether I have a business moving forward.
Deborah Jenkins would not discuss individual cases.
If there are cases that you've got, I'm personally happy to have a look into those cases. For me, it's really, really important, because if we're to make the system work, then we need people to have trust and confidence in that system.
When the ATO gets Ali Narouzi is the Inspector General of Taxation. His job is to oversee the ATO. How often does the ATO get it wrong?
I think it's, perhaps in 5% of the cases or so, an organisation that size may not get it right.
5% is still a lot in such a big organisation.
As I said, even one case is too many, and that's why it is important to have the right checks and balances in place.
I think that figure seems a little bit high, but for us it's about what you do when you make a mistake and owning up to those mistakes and trying to make it right.
And what do you do when you make a mistake?
Yeah, so there are a number of processes, and so if we identify the mistakes, I'd encourage people to actually have that conversation, say, look, we got it wrong, we are human, but what can we do about it? And that's a really important conversation we need to be having.
Ali Narouzi believes all taxpayers should be able to put their case to an independent umpire. At the moment, only big business has that right.
The large businesses can request and they can be granted an independent review. That process is not available to other taxpayers, such as small businesses, individuals. Now, I think it's appropriate that all taxpayers have access to such an independent review or some form of pre-assessment review, particularly because, you know, small business and individual have less funds and are less able to, you know, head off to court and have the things challenged in court. So I think it's appropriate that all taxpayers have, particularly small businesses with fewer resources.
The watchdog could do with more bite. Its recommendations aren't binding.
Not much point in having an independent entity if it doesn't have the powers or the capacity or the size to actually deal with the issues that we're talking about. If you're going to have an independent entity, it's got to have teeth and it's got to have size.
We have so much scrutiny in the ATO. You know, we've got various committees, so Senate estimates, other revenue committees. We've got the Inspector General, and there's a whole other range of people who are doing various reviews. So, yeah, absolutely, we've got enough scrutiny of the work that we're currently doing.
The tax office couldn't know what it was up against when it took on Helen Pataya.
A lot of people said, give up. It's not worth it. It's the tax office. You won't get anywhere.
So why did you keep fighting?
Because I knew they were wrong.
The ATO has destroyed Helen's business and wiped her finances. But through dogged determination, she's managed to expose a comedy of errors, inaction and incompetence.
Your life is put on hold. Your business is put on hold. And it's up to you to prove your innocence.
ESID for family. Don't gamble with your and your loved ones' well-being.
12 years ago, Helen Pataya started a technology company to deliver immediate access to critical medical information.
Using a QR code scanner app on the smartphone, you can access the emergency summary for the person being cared for in just seconds.
Our dad lives in Brisbane or Melbourne?
No, Brisbane.
When are they back?
No, they're on their way now.
Oh.
They're in the taxi.
It was inspired by a medical emergency during the birth of her youngest son,
Do you have anything planned for tomorrow?
when hospital staff couldn't find vital medical notes.
The market response we were getting was very responsive, so I quickly realised that if we were going to grow the business, we needed to bring in more capital. So we established a second company in 2010.
Major sporting codes like the Queensland Rugby League jumped on board, and she won government research and development grants. Then in late 2012, the ATO announced an audit of her businesses.
What happened was they notified us that they were going to audit both companies, but it was just a research and development audit. It wasn't a company-wide audit. It was fine. We had no concerns, and at the conclusion of the audit meeting, we almost didn't give it a second thought.
Almost a year went by with little contact from the ATO. And then, in late 2013, there was a bombshell. The ATO issued tax bills for $370,000 and accused Helen Pataya of claiming research and development grants that she wasn't entitled to.
They gave a decision paper that claimed that we had been reckless, that we had made false and misleading statements, and that because of that we had to pay an additional 50% penalties. I took it that it was an allegation against me and my character. It was suggesting I'd been dishonest, that I'd been fraudulent. I just felt my head was now on the chopping block. So then we endured very aggressive debt recovery actions. They came through and took they issued garnishee notices on our bank account. We were financially ravaged, yes. But yeah, we just had to start to go into debt to survive.
Her business was in free fall as her investors pulled out. The family lived off credit. There was no money to pay school fees and other expenses for her 5 children.
The children would come home and need money for things, and I suppose I was always making excuses a little bit, or do you really need that now? Constantly, every time there's bills, mobile phones, I mean, every bill. Rates, we fell into arrears. The local council took us to court as well for falling into arrears on our rates on our property. I think I just got so used to it that I probably don't realise how bad it was.
Another year later, there was a stunning development, with the ATO admitting it had got it wrong. An Assistant Commissioner for Small Business rang to offer a personal apology.
It was clear to me that there had been a breakdown in the ATO processes. So Helen, again, I apologise personally for the manner in which it's been conducted and also the impact that it's had on you personally, but also on your colleagues.
You applied for compensation.
At their suggestion.
How much did you get back? How much did they offer you?
So we originally got offered $20,000, and the letter said that it was for me to pay my accounting and legal fees.
So how much would you estimate you've lost out of all of this?
Oh, millions of dollars.
Helen Pataya launched her own forensic investigation to build her case for realistic compensation.
I felt that eventually there was possibly a way to find out what went on behind the scenes of the tax office.
Case notes she obtained through Freedom of Information revealed a litany of problems. Crucial information had not been passed on between case officers. The ATO misplaced important documents she'd given them, yet accused her of withholding this information. It built its case against Helen despite her company not even having been properly assessed. Was that company ever audited?
No.
So you received a bill and a position paper without a company that had been audited?
Yes. A subsequent case officer was instructed by the case manager to cut and paste the first company's document in and use that as the position paper for the second company.
But the first one is bogus.
Yes. So's the second one.
So they really screwed up?
Oh, I suppose that's what you would call it politely, yes.
In February, the ATO organised a mediation to try and reach an agreement on how much compensation it would pay.
Well, the offer, it was just poles apart. I mean, we'd done some calculations. We knew what the reasonable figure would be based on our sunken costs, based on what the business would have been worth, and based on what the opportunity that was stolen from us, and we were poles apart. They treat me as if I am just this mum in the suburbs. What would I know? What would I doing? How much money is it going to take to shut her up? And that's the attitude that I feel comes across.
And they obviously didn't offer you enough to shut you up.
Oh, I'm not shutting up at all, Adele. I mean, if anything, it's empowered me, it's motivated me to basically continue to move forward.
She's suing the Australian Taxation Office in the Supreme Court.
I suppose the only way to really get fairness is to take it outside the tax office and to have people that are not involved in the tax office, that don't work for the tax office, become the judges of my destiny. We've lost our investments, we've lost our home. I've personally lost my business reputation. The only thing I haven't lost is my family. Now I'm fighting for fairness, I'm fighting for them, I'm looking to recover what we've lost. Everybody could have this happen to them with the tax office. It came out of nowhere. It was completely unexpected. It's turned my life upside down. It's caused myself and my family to have to go in a whole different direction. And the truth is, it could happen to anybody.
Helen Pataya is not backing down in her quest for compensation for all that she's lost. She wants to pave the way for others caught in the same David and Goliath battle.
Somebody eventually has to win against the tax office. They can't keep winning just because they have more money, just because they have more power. That doesn't mean they can keep winning.